On a lonely stretch of highway cutting through the Nevada desert, where the asphalt shimmered with heat and the horizon blurred into nothing, a 32-year-old trucker named Marcus Webb gripped the steering wheel of his aging Peterbilt with hands that hadn't known rest in days. He was 3 weeks behind on truck payments, surviving on gas station coffee and whatever food he could afford after fuel costs, doing whatever hauls he could find just to keep the engine running and a roof over his head, even if that roof was just the sleeper cab of a semi that had seen better years. While racing to make a delivery deadline that would barely cover his diesel costs, he noticed something dark and motionless on the shoulder of Route 50, just past the abandoned rest stop where most drivers didn't bother to look twice. What he doesn't know is that the filthy, limping dog wearing a torn tactical vest is a decorated military working dog, and what happens next will change both their lives forever. The sun had begun its slow descent that afternoon, the kind that turned the desert sky into layers of burnt orange and deep purple, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Along this forgotten section of highway, where tumbleweeds gathered against rusted guardrails, and the only sound was the occasional roar of an 18-wheeler blasting past, the old rest stop sat like a skeleton, its windows boarded up, its parking lot split open by years of neglect. People passed it constantly, some with their eyes locked on GPS screens, some with music drowning out the world, some simply focused on making time, on getting to the next stop, the next paycheck, the next mile marker. But none of them looked at him. The dog lay in a heap near the entrance ramp, his coat matted with mud and oil, his ribs visible beneath fur that had once been thick and proud. He was a Belgian Malinois, or had been, before exhaustion and abandonment had stripped away everything but survival. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed, and across his back was a faded tactical vest, torn and stained, with patches barely visible beneath the grime. Every few minutes he lifted his head as a truck roared past, hoping it might slow down, that someone might see him. But they never did. His mouth was dry, his paws cracked and bleeding, and every attempt to stand sent a sharp pain through his hind leg, a limp he'd been carrying for days now. Not far from him, Marcus had pulled onto the shoulder to check his cargo straps one last time before the final push into Reno. He was barely holding on himself, a man stretched thin by bad luck and worse timing, wearing a flannel shirt with grease stains that wouldn't wash out, and a pair of work boots held together by duct tape and sheer stubbornness. His truck, a 2008 Peterbilt with over 800,000 miles on the odometer, groaned and rattled with every gear shift. It had belonged to his father, and after the old man passed, it became Marcus's only way of working. Hauling freight across the Southwest, moving anything people needed moved. The pay was inconsistent, the hours brutal, but Marcus worked with quiet desperation. That afternoon, he had one last delivery to make before midnight. One last run, and if he completed it on time, he'd have just enough to avoid repossession. If not, the bank had made it clear the truck would be gone by morning, and with it, everything he had left. Marcus tightened the last strap across a pallet of construction supplies, ready to climb back into the cab, when his eyes caught movement near the rest stop entrance. Something about the stillness struck him, not like an animal resting, but like something dying. He squinted against the glare of the setting sun and saw the shape more clearly now. A dog, large, unmoving, except for the faint rise and fall of labored breathing. Marcus hesitated, the weight of the clock ticking louder in his mind. Minutes mattered now, and the difference between keeping his livelihood and losing everything was a single delivery away. But then the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound, faint, broken, unmistakably desperate, a low whine, barely audible over the hum of distant traffic. Without quite realizing why, Marcus started walking toward the rest stop, his boots crunching against gravel and broken glass. The dog didn't move, didn't even lift his head, as if he'd learned that hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. Marcus approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, though the animal seemed too weak to be startled by anything. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, crouching down a few feet away. "You all right?" The dog's eyes opened then, amber and clouded with exhaustion, looking up at Marcus with the kind of gaze that held both wariness and a flicker of something that might have been relief. His tail twitched once, barely, then fell still again. Marcus moved closer, and that's when he saw it clearly. The tactical vest wasn't just any gear. It was military issue, faded olive green with reinforced panels, and though most of it was covered in dirt and oil, one patch remained partially visible near the shoulder. A unit insignia, worn but unmistakable, and beneath it, partially obscured by grime, the outline of what looked like a name tag. Marcus leaned in, squinting, and used his thumb to wipe away some of the dirt. The letters emerged slowly. MWD Rex, U.S. Army K-9, 75th Ranger Regiment. His breath caught in his throat. A military working dog. A ranger dog. And from the looks of it, he'd been out here for days, maybe longer, abandoned or lost, left to survive on his own in the middle of nowhere. Marcus's heart tightened. He looked down at Rex, at the way his ribs pressed against his skin, at the blood caked on his paws, at the way his hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. This wasn't just a stray. This was a soldier, a brother in arms who'd served and protected, and now lay forgotten on the side of a highway like discarded cargo. For a moment, Marcus's mind went to the clock again, to the delivery waiting in Reno, to the bank officer who'd already left 2 voicemails that week. He would miss the deadline, he would lose the truck, he would lose everything he'd fought to keep since his father died. But as he looked into Rex's eyes, weary and trusting in that fragile way that animals have when they've been hurt too many times, he knew he couldn't drive away. Some choices don't make sense on paper, some choices cost everything, but they're still the only ones worth making. Marcus exhaled slowly, then reached out his hand, letting Rex sniff it. The dog's nose was dry and warm, and after a moment he licked Marcus's palm once, weakly, as if to say thank you, even though he didn't yet know what for. "All right, Rex," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his chest. "Let's get you out of here." He slid his arms carefully beneath the dog's body, feeling the bones too close to the surface, the trembling muscles, the weight of a life that had been pushed beyond its limits. Rex whimpered softly but didn't resist, too exhausted to do anything but trust. Marcus carried him back to the truck, moving slowly, each step deliberate. He opened the passenger door and laid Rex gently across the worn bench seat, then grabbed an old blanket from the sleeper cab and tucked it around him. The dog's eyes followed Marcus's every movement, and for the first time in what might have been weeks, Rex closed his eyes fully, surrendering to the first real safety he'd felt in a long time. Marcus stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at the dog, then at the road ahead, then at his phone screen showing the delivery deadline now impossible to meet. He thought about calling, explaining, begging for more time. But he already knew how that conversation would go. Instead, he climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. But he didn't head toward Reno. He turned the truck around and drove toward the nearest town, toward a vet clinic he'd passed 20 miles back, toward the choice that made no sense except to his heart. Behind him, Rex's breathing steadied, and for the first time in days, the dog slept. The drive to the veterinary clinic in the small town of Fallon felt longer than any haul Marcus had ever made. Every bump in the road made him wince, worried it might jar Rex's injured leg, and every few minutes he glanced over to make sure the dog was still breathing, still holding on. The sun had dipped below the horizon now, leaving only the pale glow of twilight, and the highway stretched out before them like an endless ribbon of asphalt and fading light. Rex stirred occasionally, lifting his head just enough to look at Marcus, as if checking to make sure this wasn't a dream, that someone had actually stopped, that he wasn't alone anymore. Marcus reached over once and let his hand rest gently on the dog's head, feeling the warmth beneath the matted fur, the slight movement as Rex leaned into the touch. "We're almost there, buddy," Marcus said softly. "Just hang on a little longer." When they finally pulled into the gravel parking lot of Fallon Animal Hospital, the building was dark except for a single light above the entrance. Marcus cursed under his breath. It was after hours. He checked his phone, 7:47 p.m., and saw a sign on the door listing emergency contact information. Without hesitation, he dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, tired but alert. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen. What's the emergency?" "I found a dog on Route 50, Marcus said, his voice urgent but controlled. Military working dog. Looks like he's been out there for days. He's hurt, dehydrated, barely moving. I need help. There was a pause, then the sound of keys jingling. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Keep him warm and don't let him move too much. Marcus waited in the truck, engine idling, watching Rex's shallow breathing. He thought about the delivery sitting unfinished in his cargo bed, about the phone calls he'd have to make, about the consequences that were already starting to stack up like unpaid bills. But every time doubt crept in, he looked at Rex and remembered what his father used to say. A man's worth isn't measured by what he keeps, but by what he's willing to give up for something that matters. True to her word, Dr. Chen arrived 10 minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of calm efficiency that comes from years of emergency calls. She took one look at Rex and immediately helped Marcus carry him inside, laying him on a steel examination table beneath bright fluorescent lights. She worked quickly, checking vitals, examining the leg, setting up an IV line for fluids. Marcus stood nearby, hands shoved in his pockets, feeling useless but unable to look away. He's severely dehydrated and malnourished, Dr. Chen said without looking up. This leg has an old fracture that never healed properly. He's got infections in 3 of his paw pads and what looks like a partially torn ligament in his shoulder. Whoever left him out there. She trailed off, shaking her head. He's lucky you found him. Another day or two and we'd be having a very different conversation. Marcus swallowed hard. Can you fix him? Dr. Chen glanced up, her expression softening. I can stabilize him tonight. The leg will need surgery, probably a plate and some screws. The infections we can treat with antibiotics, but it's going to be expensive and it's going to take time. How much? Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would be more than he had. For everything? Surgery, medication, recovery care? We're looking at around 3,000, maybe more depending on complications. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. 3,000. He didn't have 300. He barely had enough fuel money to make it back to the highway. But he looked at Rex, at the dog who had served his country, who had been abandoned and forgotten, and he knew there was only one answer. Do it, Marcus said. Whatever he needs. I'll figure out the money. Dr. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll get started. This is going to take a few hours. There's a couch in the waiting room if you want to rest. But Marcus didn't rest. He sat in a plastic chair, phone in hand, and made the call he'd been dreading. The delivery company. The explanation. The apology that wouldn't change anything. By the time Marcus ended the call, his hand was trembling. The dispatcher's voice had been cold, professional, final. Contract terminated, effective immediately. The load will be reassigned. Your payment for this month is forfeited due to breach of delivery terms. Marcus set the phone down on the armrest and stared at the wall, at a faded poster showing a golden retriever puppy with the words, "Every life matters," printed beneath it. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd just sacrificed everything for a life that mattered, and now his own was unraveling faster than he could process. The hours crawled by. Marcus sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair, watching the second hand on the wall clock make its slow, relentless circles. Around 11:30 p.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, pulling off her gloves, her face tired but satisfied. He made it through, she said. The surgery went well. We plated the leg, cleaned out the infections, stitched up some lacerations I found under all that matted fur. He's sedated now, but he should wake up in a few hours. He's a fighter, that one. Marcus exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. Really. Thank you. Dr. Chen nodded, then hesitated. About the payment? I know, Marcus said quickly. I'll get it to you. I just need some time to figure things out. She studied him for a long moment, then pulled out a clipboard. Fill out your contact information. We'll work something out. Right now, let's just focus on getting him healthy. Marcus left the clinic just after midnight, stepping out into the cool desert air. His truck sat alone in the parking lot, looking smaller somehow, more fragile under the yellow glow of the streetlight. He climbed into the cab and sat there in the darkness, not starting the engine, just sitting with the weight of what he'd done. His phone buzzed, a text from the bank. Payment overdue. Please contact us immediately to discuss repossession proceedings. Then another from his landlord at the truck stop trailer park where he rented a space. Rent was due 3 days ago. Need payment by end of week or you'll need to vacate. Marcus closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the seat. Everything was falling apart. The delivery contract gone, the truck payment overdue, the vet bill impossible. And somewhere in a surgical recovery room, a dog he'd known for less than 4 hours was depending on him to figure it all out. He started the engine and drove slowly back toward Route 50, toward the trailer park on the outskirts of Fallon, where he'd been staying between hauls. It was a grim place, rows of aging RVs and semi-trucks parked on dirt lots, with a shared bathroom facility and a coin-operated laundry that was broken more often than not. When he pulled into his spot, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. The small storage unit where he kept his personal belongings, the one attached to his designated parking space, had a bright orange notice taped to it. Past due, access restricted. Marcus parked the truck and walked over, pulling the notice down. It was exactly what he expected. Eviction notice. 3 days to clear out or everything would be considered abandoned property. He tried the lock on the storage unit anyway, knowing it wouldn't open. It didn't. Inside that unit was everything he owned beyond the truck. His father's old military footlocker, a box of photographs, some clothes, a few tools. Not much, but it was his. Marcus stood there in the darkness, the notice crumpling in his fist, and for the first time in years, he felt the sting of tears threatening to surface. But he didn't let them fall. Instead, he climbed back into the truck cab, pulled the thin sleeping bag from behind the seat, and made up a bed in the sleeper compartment. The space was cramped and cold, smelling of diesel and old vinyl, but it was all he had now. He lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the highway, thinking about Rex recovering under clean white lights, and about the choice he'd made that cost him everything. And despite it all, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the overwhelming sense of loss, Marcus closed his eyes and slept. The morning arrived with harsh sunlight cutting through the windshield, turning the inside of the cab into a stifling box of heat and stale air. Marcus woke with a stiff neck and the kind of exhaustion that sleep does nothing to cure, the weight of yesterday's decisions pressing down on him like physical cargo. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face, and checked his phone. 8:17 a.m. And 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. Before he could return any of them, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. Marcus answered, his voice still rough from sleep. "Is this Marcus Webb?" The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, but not unkind. "Yeah, that's me." "Mr. Webb, my name is Colonel James Pritchard, U.S. Army, retired. I'm calling about a dog you brought into Fallon Animal Hospital last night, a military working dog named Rex." Marcus sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "Yeah, I found him on Route 50. Is he okay?" "Dr. Chen called me this morning. I'm listed as Rex's emergency contact from his service days." There was a pause, and when Pritchard spoke again, his voice had changed, softened with something that sounded like relief mixed with old pain. "Mr. Webb, Rex has been missing for 6 weeks. He was retired from active duty 8 months ago due to injury and was being transported to a veteran handler rehabilitation program in Colorado when the transport van was involved in an accident outside of Tonopah. The driver survived, but in the chaos, Rex escaped. We've been searching for him ever since." Marcus felt his chest tighten. 6 weeks. He's been out there for 6 weeks. "We had search teams, posted flyers, worked with local authorities, but the desert is vast, and Rex was trained to evade when injured. We feared the worst." Pritchard cleared his throat. "Dr. Chen told me what you did, that you gave up a delivery to save him, that you're paying for his surgery even though you barely know him." Marcus looked down at his hands, still stained with dirt and oil from handling Rex's vest. "He's a soldier. Couldn't just leave him there." "No," Pritchard said quietly. "Most people could. Most people did. But you didn't." There was another pause then. "Mr. Webb, I'd like to meet you in person if you're willing. I'm driving to Fallon now. Should arrive within the hour. Would you be available?" Marcus glanced around the truck cab at the sleeping bag wadded up in the corner, at the dashboard covered in past due notices and empty coffee cups. "Yeah," he said. "I'll be at the clinic." An hour later, Marcus stood in the waiting room of Fallon Animal Hospital when a man in his early 60s walked through the door. He was tall, with silver hair cut military short, wearing jeans and a weathered leather jacket with a subdued American flag patch on the shoulder. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing, but warm. "Marcus Webb?" "Yes, sir." "James Pritchard. Thank you for agreeing to meet." He glanced toward the back of the clinic. "Have you seen him yet this morning?" "Dr. Chen said I could visit in about 20 minutes once they finish changing his bandages." Pritchard nodded, then gestured toward the chairs. They sat, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Pritchard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Rex served 4 tours overseas," he said. "Explosive detection. He saved countless lives, including mine on 2 separate occasions. When he was injured and retired, I made it my personal mission to ensure he got the care and the life he deserved." His jaw tightened. "When he went missing, I blamed myself. Should have transported him personally instead of trusting a contractor." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he simply listened. "Dr. Chen told me about your situation," Pritchard continued, his eyes meeting Marcus's directly. "That you're facing financial hardship, that helping Rex may have cost you your livelihood." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I'd like to take care of his medical bills. All of them. And I'd like to do more than that." He handed Marcus the paper. It was a check made out for $5,000. "This is for you," Pritchard said. "Not as payment, as gratitude." Marcus stared at the check, the numbers blurring slightly as he tried to process what he was seeing. $5,000, more money than he'd seen in one place in over a year. Enough to catch up on the truck payment, clear the storage unit, pay rent, buy himself time to figure out what came next. But something in his chest resisted. He looked up at Colonel Pritchard and slowly, carefully, held the check back out toward him. "Sir, I appreciate this, I really do. But I didn't help Rex to get paid. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. Because he served, and he deserved better than dying alone on that highway." Marcus's voice was steady, quiet, but firm. "I don't want your money. I just wanted to make sure he was safe." Pritchard didn't take the check back. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between respect and something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition. "You know what Rex's handler used to say?" Pritchard asked after a long moment. "He used to say that the truest measure of a person isn't what they do when someone's watching, but what they do when no one is, when there's no reward, no recognition, no benefit, except knowing you did what was right." He gestured toward the check still in Marcus's hand. "That's exactly why I want you to have it." Marcus shook his head. "I can't—" "Mr. Webb," Pritchard interrupted gently but firmly, "do you know what happens to most military working dogs after they retire?" Marcus stayed quiet. "The lucky ones go to their handlers or to specialized adoption programs, but some, like Rex, fall through the cracks. Budget cuts, administrative failures, simple human error. They get lost in the system, and sometimes they end up exactly where you found him." "Forgotten?" Pritchard's expression hardened with old anger. "I've been trying to change that for years. I run a nonprofit called Guardian Paws Project. We rescue, rehabilitate, and rehome retired military and service dogs. But it's not enough. We need people who understand what these animals represent, what they've sacrificed." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Marcus's aging Peterbilt sat alone. "I've been doing this work solo for 3 years, Pritchard continued, managing everything from my home office, coordinating with shelters and veterinary clinics across the Southwest, trying to find these dogs before it's too late. But I need help, real help, someone who doesn't just see a job but a mission." He turned back to Marcus. "Dr. Chen told me you're a veteran too, Army like me." Marcus nodded slowly. 101st Airborne. Did 1 tour in Afghanistan before my father got sick. Came home to take care of him." "Then you understand," Pritchard said. "You understand what service means, what loyalty means, what these dogs gave up for us." He walked back over and sat down again, this time closer. "I'm not offering you charity, Marcus. I'm offering you a job. Come work with me. Help me run Guardian Paws. We rescue the dogs, get them medical care, find them homes with veterans who need them as much as they need us. The pay isn't great, but it's steady. And I can provide housing, a small cabin on my property in Cedar Valley, about 40 miles from here." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Sir, I don't have any experience with nonprofits or—" "You have the only experience that matters," Pritchard cut in. "You stopped when everyone else drove past. You sacrificed everything for a dog you'd never met because you knew it was right. That's not something I can train. That's who you are." He paused, then added more softly, "Rex is going to need weeks of recovery care before he's ready for permanent placement. He needs someone patient, someone who understands what he's been through. Someone like you." Marcus looked down at the check again, then at the door leading to the recovery room where Rex was sleeping, bandaged and safe for the first time in 6 weeks. "I'd also like you to foster Rex during his recovery," Pritchard said, "if you're willing." Marcus's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "You're offering me a job and a place to live?" "I'm offering you a purpose," Pritchard corrected. "The rest just comes with it." "And so?" Marcus said yes. That afternoon, with Dr. Chen's careful instructions and a truck bed full of medical supplies, pain medication, and special recovery food that Pritchard insisted on paying for, Marcus followed the colonel's pickup truck 40 miles east to Cedar Valley. The cabin sat on 5 acres of high desert land, surrounded by scrub brush and juniper trees, with a view of distant mountains that turned purple in the evening light. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with wood floors that creaked in all the right places, but it was clean and warm and more space than Marcus had called his own in years. Pritchard helped him unload, then showed him the main house, a larger ranch-style building 100 yards away where the nonprofit operated, out of a converted garage that served as office, storage, and coordination center. "Take a few days to settle in," Pritchard had said before leaving that first evening. "Get Rex comfortable. We'll talk about the work details once you're both ready." Rex came home 3 days later, moving slowly on 3 legs with the 4th held carefully off the ground, wrapped in bright blue bandages that Dr. Chen promised could come off in 2 weeks. Marcus carried him into the cabin and set him down gently on a thick dog bed positioned near the window where the morning sun would warm him. For the first few days, they simply existed together. Marcus learned Rex's rhythms, the way he'd wake at dawn and watch the light change across the valley, the way he'd rest his head on Marcus's boot when the pain medication made him drowsy, the way his tail would thump twice against the floor when Marcus said his name. Slowly, carefully, trust built between them, the kind that doesn't need words, only presence. Within a month, Marcus had learned the full scope of Guardian Paws Project, the network of veterinary clinics they partnered with, the database of retired military working dogs that needed placement, the veterans waiting for a companion who understood what nightmares sounded like and didn't ask questions about scars. Pritchard taught him how to coordinate rescues, how to assess a dog's needs, how to match the right animal with the right person. But more than that, Marcus brought something Pritchard hadn't expected, the perspective of someone who'd been at the bottom, who understood what it meant to have nothing and to be offered everything. Together, they expanded the mission. They created the Second Chance Initiative, a program that didn't just save dogs but actively recruited struggling veterans, people like Marcus had been, to work as foster handlers and rehabilitation specialists. They provided training, housing, and steady work to men and women who'd fallen through society's cracks the same way Rex had, giving them purpose and a paycheck while the dogs healed. Within a year, Guardian Paws had rescued 43 military working dogs. Within 2 years, they'd placed over 100 and employed 17 veterans in various roles across Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. The cabin where Marcus lived became the first of 6 recovery houses, each staffed by veterans fostering dogs back to health. Local news picked up the story. Then, national outlets, donations increased, partnerships formed with larger veteran organizations. And through it all, Marcus remained grounded, remembering the moment on Route 50 when he'd had to choose between his own survival and doing what was right. Rex recovered fully, his leg growing stronger each week until the limp disappeared entirely. Pritchard offered to place him with a veteran on the waiting list, but Marcus couldn't do it. Neither could Pritchard, who'd grown attached during the recovery. So Rex stayed, becoming the unofficial mascot of Guardian Paws, greeting every new rescue with patient understanding, as if to say, "I know what you've been through, you're safe now." And every so often, when Marcus drove the highway for rescue calls, he would slow down as he passed that abandoned rest stop on Route 50. He'd look at the spot where he'd found Rex, where his life had changed completely, and he'd remember what his father used to say. "A man's worth isn't measured by what he keeps, but by what he's willing to give up for something that matters." Sometimes you don't find your purpose. It finds you, lying broken on the side of a highway, waiting for someone to care enough to stop. And sometimes all it takes to change two lives is the willingness to look when others turn away, to sacrifice when it makes no sense, and to believe that doing the right thing is always worth the cost. If this story touched your heart, join us in honoring the courage of military working dogs and the veterans who serve alongside them. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of loyalty, sacrifice, and second chances. Because every hero deserves to come home